The security camera captured it all. The moment that would shatter everything Victoria Blackstone thought she knew about her daughter. At exactly 3:47 in the morning, while the rest of Manhattan slept, 8-year-old Maya stood motionless in the executive washroom of Blackstone Industries, tears streaming down her face as she pressed both palms against the mirror. And there, kneeling beside her in his janitor's uniform, was a man Victoria had never bothered to notice, speaking to Maya in rapid, fluid Mandarin. The child, who hadn't spoken a single word in English in 4 years, suddenly turned toward him, her lips moving, forming sounds Victoria had never heard before. By the time Victoria burst through the washroom door, her heart hammering with disbelief, Maya had gone silent again. But something in her daughter's eyes had changed forever. Victoria Blackstone had built her empire on the principle that everything could be controlled, measured, and optimized. At 35, she commanded a financial consulting firm that managed portfolios worth over $8 billion. Her penthouse office on the 62nd floor of her own Manhattan tower looked down on a city that bent to her will. Every morning she arrived before dawn in tailored Armani suits, her black hair pulled into a sleek chignon that never showed a strand out of place. The financial world knew her as the Ice Queen, brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. Magazine covers called her a visionary. Business schools taught case studies on her strategies. She spoke 6 languages fluently and could analyze market trends while most people struggled with basic arithmetic. But none of that mattered when she looked at her daughter. Maya was 8 years old, with delicate features that echoed Victoria's own and dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets no child should carry. She had been diagnosed with severe autism at age 3, shortly after her father had walked out, claiming he couldn't handle a broken child. The diagnosis came with a laundry list of challenges: sensory processing disorder, communication delays, repetitive behaviors, and complete withdrawal from social interaction. But what destroyed Victoria wasn't the autism itself. It was the silence. Maya hadn't spoken a word since her 4th birthday. Not to her team of therapists, not to her expensive private tutors, not even to Victoria herself. The child existed in a world of carefully structured routines and gentle supervision, surrounded by specialists who spoke about her as if she weren't there. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Every night, Victoria brought Maya to the office because leaving her with babysitters felt like another form of abandonment. The child would curl up on the leather sofa in Victoria's office, working through puzzles or arranging colored blocks into precise patterns while Victoria conquered the financial world from her glass desk. It was far from ideal, but it was the only way Victoria could be both the mother Maya needed and the CEO her company demanded. The building emptied by 7 each evening, leaving only security guards and cleaning crews to maintain the gleaming facade. Victoria often worked until midnight, her office lights a lonely beacon in the darkened tower. Maya would fall asleep on the sofa, and Victoria would carry her to the executive rest area, where a daybed had been installed specifically for these late nights. Victoria told herself this arrangement was temporary, that once she found the right treatment, the right specialist, Maya would improve enough to attend regular school, make friends, speak. She'd been telling herself that for 4 years now. Chen Wei had been invisible for so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. At 42, he possessed the kind of quiet dignity that came from accepting life's hardships without bitterness. His lean frame moved through the Blackstone Industries building with practiced efficiency, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies and industrial vacuum equipment through corridors that still smelled faintly of expensive cologne and ambition. He wore the standard navy blue uniform of the night maintenance crew, his black hair touched with silver at the temples, his face marked by the kind of lines that came from genuine smiles rather than forced ones. His hands were calloused from years of physical labor, but they moved with surprising gentleness when he handled delicate objects or wiped down surfaces. Chen Wei cleaned the 62nd floor every Tuesday and Friday night, working his way methodically through executive offices that cost more to furnish than most people earned in a year. He'd grown accustomed to the loneliness of the job, the way wealthy people looked through him as if he were part of the furniture. It was better than being stared at, judged, questioned about his accent or his history. But Chen Wei hadn't always been invisible. 15 years ago, he'd been Dr. Chen Wei, one of Beijing's most respected child psychologists, specializing in autism spectrum disorders and developmental delays. He'd published research papers, spoken at international conferences, built a reputation as someone who could reach children others had given up on. His daughter Li had been his greatest joy, a bright, curious girl who spoke Mandarin and English with equal fluency, who dreamed of becoming a teacher like her father. She was 6 when the earthquake struck their apartment building in Beijing. Chen Wei had been at a conference in Shanghai. By the time he flew home, rescue workers had given up hope. Li's death broke something in Chen Wei that couldn't be repaired. He dedicated his life to helping children, but he couldn't save his own daughter. The grief was too vast for Beijing to contain. He needed to disappear, to become someone else entirely. America offered anonymity. A janitorial job required no explanations, no credentials that reminded him of the life he'd lost. For 7 years, he'd pushed mops and emptied trash cans, speaking only when absolutely necessary, keeping his past buried so deep that sometimes he almost forgot it himself. But some skills never fade. When Chen Wei walked through the Blackstone building at night, he noticed things others missed. The way certain employees arranged their desks suggested anxiety disorders. The prescription bottles glimpsed in executive bathroom wastebaskets told stories of depression and insomnia. And recently, he'd begun noticing the small girl who slept on the leather sofa in the corner office. The child was clearly autistic. He could see it in her repetitive hand movements, her aversion to eye contact, the way she organized objects into precise patterns. But there was something else, something that made his trained instincts prickle with recognition. The girl's silence felt different from typical autism-related communication delays. It felt like withdrawal, like someone who had simply stopped trying to connect with a world that didn't understand her. Chen Wei had seen that kind of silence before in children who'd experienced trauma or who were struggling with cultural displacement. Sometimes autism wasn't the whole story. Sometimes it was just the diagnosis that stuck, because doctors couldn't see past their own assumptions. The Tuesday night that changed everything started like any other. Victoria's office lights glowed against the darkness as Chen Wei arrived for his shift. Through the glass walls, he could see the familiar silhouette, the billionaire CEO hunched over her computer, the small girl asleep on the sofa nearby. He cleaned the surrounding offices first, working quietly to avoid disturbing them. It was past midnight when Victoria finally gathered her papers and gently lifted Maya from the sofa. The child stirred but didn't wake as Victoria carried her toward the executive rest area. Chen Wei was emptying wastebaskets in the hallway when he heard it, a sound so soft he almost missed it. It was coming from the executive washroom adjacent to Victoria's office. He paused, listening. There it was again. A small, distressed whimper. Chen Wei abandoned his cart and moved quickly toward the sound. The washroom door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see Maya standing before the large mirror, above the marble sinks. She was fully awake now, her small hands pressed flat against the glass, her body rigid with distress. Victoria was nowhere in sight, probably gathering things from her office or taking a phone call. Maya was alone, trapped in whatever internal storm was overwhelming her. Chen Wei had learned to mind his own business. Interfering with the CEO's daughter would certainly cost him his job. But as he watched the child's silent distress, 15 years of professional instinct overrode his caution. This wasn't just an autistic meltdown. This was something more specific, more urgent. He stepped into the washroom slowly, keeping his voice soft and unthreatening. "Hello, little one." The words came out in Mandarin without conscious thought, the language of comfort and tenderness that he'd spoken to Li. Maya's entire body went still. Her hands remained pressed against the mirror, but her breathing changed, became less frantic. Chen Wei knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. "Are you lost?" he continued in Mandarin, his voice gentle. "It's very late. Are you frightened?" Maya turned her head slightly, just enough to see him in her peripheral vision. Her dark eyes were wide, intelligent, studying his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. There was recognition there, not of him personally, but of something familiar in his words. "My name is Chen Wei," he said quietly, still in Mandarin. "I work here at night, when the building is quiet. I think you might be scared because everything feels too big, too loud during the day. Is that right?" Maya's lips moved slightly, forming shapes but producing no sound. Chen Wei's heart began to race. He'd seen this before, selective mutism, often misdiagnosed as part of autism spectrum disorders, especially in children dealing with cultural or linguistic confusion. "Can you hear me when I speak like this?" he asked, switching to a dialect of Mandarin that was more regional, more intimate. "Does this sound like home?" Maya's reaction was immediate and shocking. She spun around to face him directly, her eyes locking onto his with startling clarity. Her mouth opened, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Nai nai." The Mandarin word for grandmother came out cracked and uncertain, followed by a stream of rapid Chinese that tumbled from her lips like water from a broken dam. Chen Wei's eyes filled with tears. Maya wasn't just autistic, she was bilingual, caught between languages, possibly raised by a Mandarin-speaking caregiver who was no longer present. The autism diagnosis might have been partial at best, masking a child who'd simply stopped communicating in English when her Chinese-speaking world disappeared. "Yes, little star," he whispered back in Mandarin, using an endearment his own daughter had loved. "I understand you. You're not broken. You're just speaking a language they can't hear." Maya stepped closer, her small hand reaching out tentatively to touch his uniform sleeve. Her words came faster now, still quiet, but unmistakably coherent. She was telling him about the noise, about how loud everything was, about missing someone called Nai Nai, who used to sing to her in the old language. That's when Chen Wei heard the sharp intake of breath behind them. Victoria Blackstone stood in the washroom doorway, her face drained of all color. She'd returned to check on Maya and found her daughter, her silent, autistic daughter, having an animated conversation with the janitor in fluent Mandarin. "What?" Victoria's voice came out as barely a croak. "What is she saying?" Chen Wei stood slowly, his heart hammering. He was about to lose his job, possibly face legal action for approaching the CEO's child without permission. But as he looked at Victoria's stricken face, he saw something beyond anger, desperate, aching hope. Maya had gone silent again the moment she sensed her mother's presence, her body tensing, her eyes dropping to the floor. The transformation was heartbreaking, from animated communication back to defensive withdrawal. "She's speaking Mandarin," Chen Wei said quietly in English, his accent thick with emotion. I think, I think she may have been raised by a Chinese-speaking caregiver. Someone she lost. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Her nanny, she whispered. When Maya was little, we had a nanny from Beijing. Mrs. Liu. She was with Maya from birth until she was 4. She died suddenly, a heart attack. Maya stopped speaking right after. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Maya hadn't lost her ability to communicate. She'd lost her primary language partner. Her autism made the transition to English-only communication nearly impossible, especially while grieving the loss of someone crucial to her world. Chen Wei watched understanding dawn on Victoria's face, followed immediately by a guilt so profound it was painful to witness. 4 years, Victoria whispered. She's been trying to speak to me for 4 years and I couldn't hear her. Maya remained silent, her eyes fixed on the marble floor, her body language screaming retreat. The moment of connection was over, shattered by the presence of the English-speaking world that had failed her so completely. Victoria looked at Chen Wei with something between desperation and command. Would you? She struggled to form the request. Can you talk to her again, please? Chen Wei knelt back down, switching to Mandarin. Maya, your mother is here. She wants to understand. Can you tell me what would make you feel safe? Maya's response was a single word in Mandarin. Home. Where is home? Chen Wei asked gently. Maya looked up at Victoria for the first time, her eyes holding a mixture of longing and resignation. When she spoke again, it was in Mandarin, but the emotion was universal. She wanted her Nai Nai. She wanted the songs and stories in the language of her heart. She wanted someone to understand that her silence wasn't defiance. It was grief. Chen Wei translated quietly, watching Victoria's face crumble with each word. She says she remembers you, he added softly, but she says you sound angry when she can't answer your English words. She doesn't understand why you stopped letting her speak the language she knows. Victoria sank down onto the marble floor, tears streaming down her face. For 4 years, she'd been trying to fix what wasn't broken, treating communication as a medical problem when it was actually a linguistic and emotional one. Her daughter hadn't lost her ability to connect. Victoria had lost her ability to listen. I don't speak Mandarin, Victoria whispered. How do I reach her? Chen Wei met her eyes, seeing past the CEO mask to the mother beneath. You learn to listen in new ways. You let her teach you. And maybe... He hesitated, knowing he was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Maybe you let someone who understands help you build a bridge. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Maya's soft breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Victoria looked at her daughter, then at the janitor who'd accomplished in 5 minutes what teams of specialists had failed to achieve in 4 years. What's your name? She asked quietly. Chen Wei. Your last name isn't really Chen, is it? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Dr. Chen Wei. I was a child psychologist in Beijing before. Victoria's eyes widened, but she didn't ask for details. Some stories could wait. Would you... Her voice broke slightly. Would you be willing to help me understand my daughter? Chen Wei looked down at Maya, who was watching their exchange with intelligent eyes. In Mandarin, he asked her, Would you like me to help your mother learn to hear you? Maya's response was the first smile Chen Wei had seen from her, tentative but real. She nodded once, then spoke a single word that needed no translation. Please. The following morning, Victoria sat in her office, staring at security footage she'd requested from the night before. Frame by frame, she watched her daughter transform from a silent, distressed child into someone alive with communication and purpose. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., the moment that had shattered everything she thought she knew about Maya's condition. Victoria had spent the rest of the night researching Chen Wei through every database available to her. What she found confirmed his story and revealed something more heartbreaking. Dr. Chen Wei had been more than just a respected child psychologist. He'd been a pioneer in bilingual autism therapy, specifically working with children caught between cultures and languages. His published papers, written in careful academic English, described cases remarkably similar to Maya's. Children diagnosed with severe autism who were actually suffering from linguistic displacement, cultural grief, and selective mutism triggered by the loss of their primary language environment. His success rates had been extraordinary. Then, abruptly, the publication stopped. His name vanished from conference rosters. The brilliant doctor had simply disappeared from the academic world in 2009. The same year, Maya's nanny died. Victoria's assistant knocked softly. "Ms. Blackstone, your 9 o'clock is here." "Cancel it," Victoria said without looking up from her computer. "Cancel everything today and find out what time the night maintenance supervisor arrives." At 2 p.m., Victoria stood in the building's service elevator, descending to the maintenance level, a place she'd never seen despite owning the building. The floors down here were concrete, the walls painted institutional green. It smelled like industrial soap and machinery. She found Chen Wei in a break room that contained 3 vending machines, a scratched table, and plastic chairs that had seen better decades. He was eating lunch alone, rice and vegetables from a thermos container, reading what appeared to be a worn paperback book in Chinese. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before settling into wariness. Victoria realized this might be the first time in 7 years that someone in a business suit had voluntarily entered this space. "Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "may I sit down?" He gestured to the chair across from him, closing his book carefully. "You shouldn't be down here, Ms. Blackstone. If someone sees—" "I don't care who sees." Victoria sat down, her expensive silk blouse oddly out of place among the industrial surroundings. "I need to understand what happened last night. I need to understand my daughter." Chen Wei studied her face, looking for signs of the corporate manipulation he'd learned to expect from wealthy people. Instead, he saw exhaustion and genuine desperation. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with why Maya spoke to you in Mandarin. Start with why 4 years of specialists never figured out what you understood in 5 minutes. Chen Wei was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "In Beijing, I worked with many children who were considered severe autism cases, but often the severity wasn't about autism, it was about lost connections. When a child's primary emotional and linguistic foundation disappears suddenly, they don't just grieve, they shut down communication entirely." He leaned forward slightly. "Maya's autism is real, but it's not the whole story. She's what we call linguistically displaced. Her brain developed with Mandarin as the language of comfort, safety, love. When Mrs. Liu died, Maya didn't just lose a caregiver, she lost her entire linguistic identity." Victoria's throat tightened. "So she can understand English?" "Of course, but understanding and feeling safe enough to communicate are different things. To Maya, English is the language of doctors, specialists, people who study her like a problem to be solved. Mandarin is the language of love, the language Mrs. Liu used to sing her to sleep, to comfort her when she was overwhelmed." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. "I never learned Mandarin. I thought she would adapt. The specialists said immersion in English would help her develop better language skills. The specialists were wrong." Chen Wei's voice was gentle but firm. "Forcing a grieving, autistic child to abandon her emotional language is like asking someone to forget how to breathe." She didn't stop talking because she couldn't. She stopped talking because no one was speaking her heart language anymore. Victoria pressed her palms against her eyes. I failed her. For 4 years, I've been trying to fix something that wasn't broken. You were a single mother doing what experts told you to do. There's no shame in that. But now you know better. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Victoria looked up. That's why I'm here. I want to hire you, not as a janitor, as Maya's therapist, as her bridge back to communication. Chen Wei shook his head immediately. I'm not a doctor anymore, Ms. Blackstone. I clean floors. I don't practice psychology. Why? Victoria's voice was sharper now. I read your papers. I know what you accomplished. You helped hundreds of children. Why did you walk away? The question hung between them like a challenge. Chen Wei stared down at his hands, weathered now from years of manual labor. Because I couldn't help the one child who mattered most. Your daughter, Li. The name came out like a prayer. She was 6 when the earthquake hit our building in Beijing. I was in Shanghai at a conference presenting research about helping children through trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria waited, sensing there was more. Li was bilingual too, Mandarin and English. She was so proud of her English, wanted to be a teacher like me. After she died, I couldn't bear to hear children's voices anymore. Every session reminded me of conversations I'd never have with her. Every success felt like betrayal. Chen Wei met Victoria's eyes. I came to America to disappear. Being a janitor means no one expects me to save anyone. It's safer. But last night, you did save someone. You saved Maya. Last night was... Chen Wei struggled for words. An accident. Instinct. I heard a child in distress and responded. That doesn't mean I'm ready to be a therapist again. Victoria leaned forward. What if it's not about being ready? What if it's about Maya needing exactly who you are right now? Not the doctor you were, but the person who understands loss and silence and what it feels like when the world stops making sense? Something shifted in Chen Wei's expression. You're asking me to risk everything I've built here, the safety of invisibility. I'm asking you to help my daughter find her voice. And maybe, Victoria's voice softened, maybe help yourself remember yours. That evening, Victoria arranged to stay late again, but this time with purpose. She'd spent the afternoon learning basic Mandarin phrases from online tutorials, her pronunciation terrible, but her intention clear. When Chen Wei arrived for his shift, Victoria was waiting in her office with Maya, who sat on the floor arranging colored blocks in precise geometric patterns. I spoke with your supervisor, Victoria told Chen Wei. I've arranged for you to have access to my office during your shift. If you're willing, I'd like you to spend time with Maya while I work. Not as therapy, just as conversation. Chen Wei looked at Maya, who had paused in her block arrangement to watch him with those intelligent dark eyes. And afterward? Afterward, you help me understand what she's telling me. You teach me to hear her language. Chen Wei knelt down beside Maya, switching to gentle Mandarin. Hello, little star. Would you like me to visit with you while your mother works? Maya's response was immediate, a stream of excited Chinese that made Victoria's chest ache with longing to understand. Chen Wei listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his face softening as Maya became more animated. What is she saying? Victoria asked. She's telling me about the blocks. The pattern she's making represents a garden, like the one Mrs. Liu used to describe from her childhood in Guangzhou. Maya remembers the stories. Chen Wei's voice was full of wonder. She's been building memory gardens this whole time, not random patterns, recreations of places that exist only in stories she heard in Mandarin. Victoria sank into her desk chair, overwhelmed. She's an artist. More than that, she's a storyteller, a keeper of memories. She's been preserving Mrs. Liu's legacy in the only way she could. As the weeks passed, a routine developed. Chen Wei would arrive early for his shift and spend an hour with Maya, speaking with her in Mandarin while Victoria watched and slowly learned. Maya blossomed under the attention, her movements becoming less rigid, her eye contact more frequent. But the real breakthrough came when Chen Wei brought something to show Maya, a small wooden box filled with photographs. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing pictures of Li at various ages, always smiling, often holding books or toys. "This was my daughter," he told Maya in Mandarin. "Her name was Li. She loved stories, too." Maya studied the photographs with intense concentration, then looked up at Chen Wei with something like recognition. In careful Mandarin, she asked if Li had gone to sleep like Nai Nai had. Chen Wei's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, little star, they both went to sleep and couldn't wake up. But we can keep their stories alive by remembering them." Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a small notebook, something Victoria hadn't known existed. The pages were filled with careful drawings and Chinese characters copied from memory. Maya had been writing down every story Mrs. Liu had told her, preserving them in the only language that felt right. "She's been grieving," Chen Wei explained to Victoria later. "All this time she's been processing loss but couldn't share it because no one spoke her emotional language. The autism made it harder, but the real barrier was linguistic isolation." Victoria felt pieces of her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. Can she learn to communicate in English again? She never stopped understanding English, but for her to feel safe expressing complex emotions, needs, wants, we need to build a bridge. She needs to know that speaking in either language will be met with understanding, not frustration. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The process was slower than Victoria had hoped, but more profound than she'd imagined. Chen Wei began teaching Victoria basic Mandarin during their evening sessions. Not just words, but emotional context, cultural nuances, the way tone and gesture carried meaning beyond vocabulary. Victoria was a terrible student at first, her pronunciation making Maya giggle, the first laughter Victoria had heard from her daughter in 4 years. But Maya began to help, gently correcting her mother's tones, showing her the hand gestures that went with certain phrases. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, a 3-way conversation began to emerge. Maya would speak in Mandarin to Chen Wei, who would translate for Victoria, who would respond in broken Mandarin that Maya would help refine. It was clumsy and emotional and absolutely revolutionary. One evening, as Victoria practiced counting to 10 in Mandarin for the 100th time, Maya did something unexpected. She reached for her mother's hand and said, very quietly, in English, 1, 2, 3. Victoria went completely still. Maya continued counting in English, then switched to Mandarin, then back to English, her small voice gaining confidence with each number. When she reached 10, she looked at her mother and smiled. "Both," Maya said clearly in English. "I can do both." Victoria burst into tears, pulling Maya into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart, you can do both. You can do anything." Chen Wei watched the moment with his own eyes wet, remembering Li's excitement when she'd mastered a particularly difficult English phrase. The pain was still there, but for the first time in years, it was accompanied by something else. Purpose. But the corporate world doesn't pause for personal breakthroughs. As Maya's progress became visible, word began to spread through Blackstone Industries that their CEO was spending hours each evening with the janitor, that her previously silent daughter was somehow speaking again. Board members whispered in hallways. Rumors circulated about Victoria's judgment, her priorities, her fitness to laud a company worth billions. The whispers reached the ears of Marcus Chen, the lead board member who'd been waiting for any excuse to question Victoria's leadership. The confrontation came during a quarterly board meeting 3 weeks after Maya had spoken her first English words in years. Marcus waited until the formal business was concluded, then leaned forward with the predatory smile of someone about to draw blood. "Victoria, there's been some concern about your recent working arrangements. Several employees have reported unusual activity in your office after hours. Something about the janitorial staff being given special access." Victoria felt the familiar ice slide through her veins. "My arrangements with building maintenance are not board business, Marcus. They are when they interfere with your ability to lead this company effectively. You've missed 3 client meetings this month. Your assistant says you're often unreachable after 6 p.m., and there are rumors about your daughter's medical care being provided by unconventional sources." The room went silent. Victoria understood the threat immediately. They were questioning not just her professional judgment, but her competence as a mother. "My daughter is making remarkable progress," Victoria said carefully. "Progress that specialists said was impossible." "Progress achieved how, exactly?" Marcus's voice dripped skepticism. "Through late-night consultations with building maintenance?" "Victoria, your personal life is your own, but when it affects your professional performance, my performance speaks for itself. Company profits are up 18% this quarter because your team is compensating for your absence, but that's not sustainable." Marcus played his final card. "The board has been approached by Henderson and Associates about a potential merger. They're interested, but they've expressed concerns about leadership stability." Victoria's blood went cold. Henderson and Associates was their biggest competitor, led by men who'd spent years trying to undermine her authority. A merger would mean her removal as CEO, the dissolution of everything she'd built. "Is this an ultimatum, Marcus?" "It's a reality check. Fix your priorities, return your focus to this company, or the board will have to consider alternatives that protect our shareholders' interests." Victoria left the meeting with her hands shaking. She had 48 hours to choose between the merger that would destroy her career and the therapy sessions that were saving her daughter's life. That night, she sat in her office with Maya sleeping on the sofa and Chen Wei quietly organizing his cleaning supplies. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like physical pain. "You heard," she said when Chen Wei approached. "I heard enough. They want you to choose." "How can I choose between Maya and everything I've built? This company employs 3,000 people. Their families depend on the decisions I make." Chen Wei was quiet for a moment. "In Beijing, after Li died, everyone told me I should go back to work, that I had other children depending on my expertise, that my grief was selfish when I could be helping families. What did you do?" "I chose grief. I chose to disappear rather than risk failing another child. And for 7 years, I told myself it was the noble choice." He looked at Maya's sleeping form. "But watching you fight for your daughter, I realize I was wrong. I wasn't protecting other children. I was protecting myself from the possibility of more pain." Victoria met his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe the brave choice isn't the one that feels safe. Maybe the brave choice is the one that risks everything for what matters most." Chen Wei knelt down beside Maya and gently touched her shoulder. She stirred, blinking up at him with sleepy eyes. "Little star," he said in Mandarin, "your mother has to make a difficult choice. Do you understand?" Maya sat up, more alert now. In clear English, she asked, "Are you going away?" The question pierced Victoria's heart. Maya had finally learned to communicate in both languages, but her deepest fear was still abandonment. losing another important person from her life. "No, sweetheart," Victoria said, switching to her improving Mandarin. "Chen Wei isn't going away, but Mama has to decide about her work." Maya looked between them with the intuitive wisdom of children who've learned early that adult decisions often mean loss. In perfect bilingual code switching that would have amazed any linguist, she said, "Work is important, Mama, but I need you more. I need both of you. We're family now." The simple truth from her 8-year-old daughter cut through all of Victoria's corporate calculations. Maya was right. They had become family, not through blood or legal documents, but through the messy, imperfect work of learning to communicate across cultures and languages and loss. Victoria made her decision. Victoria called the emergency board meeting for the following morning. She arrived at the conference room 20 minutes early, wearing her sharpest charcoal suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained either her salvation or her professional suicide note. Maya sat beside her in a small chair that Victoria had requested be brought in, another breach of corporate protocol that would undoubtedly be noted. Marcus and the other 8 board members filed in with expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Victoria had specifically requested that Chen Wei be present as well, and he sat quietly near the back wall in his maintenance uniform, looking profoundly uncomfortable among the mahogany and marble. "Before we begin," Victoria said, standing at the head of the polished table, "I want you all to meet my daughter properly. Maya, would you say hello to these people?" Maya looked up from the coloring book she'd been working on and spoke clearly in English. "Good morning. My name is Maya Blackstone. I'm 8 years old and I speak 2 languages." The board members shifted uncomfortably. They'd expected to discuss Victoria's professional competence, not make small talk with a child. 4 months ago, Victoria continued, Maya hadn't spoken a word in any language for 4 years. She'd been diagnosed with severe autism and selective mutism. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on specialists, treatments, experimental therapies. Nothing worked. She gestured toward Chen Wei. This man, who cleans our offices at night, accomplished in 5 minutes what teams of experts couldn't achieve in 4 years. Not because he's magic, but because he understood something the specialists missed. Maya wasn't broken. She was grieving. Marcus leaned forward impatiently. "Victoria, this is all very touching, but let me finish." Victoria's voice cut through his objection like steel. "Mr. Chen, Dr. Chen Wei, is a former child psychologist from Beijing. He specialized in bilingual autism therapy. He walked away from his career after losing his own daughter, and he's been working as a janitor for 7 years because grief made him believe he had nothing left to offer." She opened her portfolio and distributed copies of Chen Wei's published research papers, along with documentation of Maya's recent progress. These papers represent groundbreaking work in cross-cultural childhood development. Dr. Chen's methods have helped hundreds of children, and now he's helping Maya become the brilliant, bilingual, emotionally intelligent child she was always meant to be. Board member Sarah Martinez picked up one of the papers, scanning the abstract. This was published in the International Journal of Child Psychology. The research is impressive. "It's more than impressive," Victoria said. "It's revolutionary. And Henderson and Associates wants to acquire us precisely because they know we're on the verge of something extraordinary. They don't want our financial assets. They want to eliminate competition before we become unstoppable." Marcus's expression had grown increasingly skeptical. "Victoria, you're asking us to believe that your personal situation with your daughter somehow relates to corporate strategy. I'm asking you to see the bigger picture." Victoria moved to the presentation screen and pulled up a slide she'd prepared. What if Blackstone Industries wasn't just a financial consulting firm? What if we became pioneers in something far more valuable? Cross-cultural education and therapeutic services. The room went silent. Victoria clicked to the next slide, showing market research she'd compiled in the sleepless hours after the previous evening's revelation. There are over 50 million bilingual children in the United States. Thousands of them are misdiagnosed with learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorders, and behavioral problems when the real issue is linguistic displacement. Dr. Chen's methods could help them all. She clicked again. Conservative estimates suggest a market value of $8 billion in therapeutic services alone. Add educational consulting for multinational families, corporate diversity training, and international adoption support, and we're looking at a $20 billion industry that currently doesn't exist. Sarah leaned forward, her financial mind clearly engaged. You're proposing we pivot the entire company? I'm proposing we expand it. Keep our core financial services, but add a therapeutic and educational division. We have the resources, the international connections, and now we have the expertise. Victoria looked directly at Chen Wei. If Dr. Chen is willing to lead it. Chen Wei had been silent throughout the presentation, his face unreadable. Now all eyes turned to him. This quiet man in a janitor's uniform who was suddenly being offered the chance to transform not just his life, but the lives of countless children. I haven't practiced in 7 years, he said quietly. My credentials would need to be renewed. I'd need to retrain on current methods. We'd handle all of that, Victoria said. Full support for recertification, continuing education, whatever you need. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. You're asking us to risk everything on an untested business model led by a janitor with outdated credentials, all because of one anecdotal success with your daughter. No, Maya's voice cut through the room like a bell. She had stopped coloring and was looking directly at Marcus with those intelligent dark eyes. You're asking Mama to choose between helping me and helping other people. But she doesn't have to choose. She can do both. Maya stood up and walked to Chen Wei, taking his hand. In perfect Mandarin, she said something that made him smile through sudden tears. Then she switched to English. Dr. Chen saved my voice. Now he can save other children's voices too. That's what heroes do. The simplicity of her logic hung in the air. Out of the mouths of babes, Victoria thought, watching her daughter's fearless advocacy for the man who'd changed their lives. There's something else, Victoria said, playing her final card. Henderson and Associates isn't just interested in acquiring us. They've been attempting to poach Dr. Chen. She placed a letter on the table, something that had arrived by courier that morning. They somehow discovered his identity and credentials. They're offering him a position developing their own therapeutic services division. Apparently, they've been researching this market opportunity for months. The board members passed the letter around, their expressions shifting as they realized they weren't just facing a corporate merger. They were facing the loss of a potentially revolutionary asset to their biggest competitor. So our choice isn't really between financial consulting and therapeutic services, Sarah said slowly. It's between being industry pioneers or watching Henderson and Associates become pioneers while we're relegated to traditional financial services. Exactly. Victoria sat back down. The question is, do we have the courage to take the risk? Marcus was reading Chen Wei's research papers more carefully now, his hostility replaced by calculation. The market research is compelling, but we'd need guarantees, proof of concept beyond your daughter's case. Chen Wei spoke for the first time since Maya's declaration. I have contacts, former colleagues in Beijing, New York, London, therapists who've been using my methods independently. We could organize pilot programs, controlled studies, peer review. How quickly could you put together a proposal? Sarah asked. 6 weeks, maybe less. Victoria felt something shift in the room's energy. What had started as a threat to her career was transforming into the biggest opportunity Blackstone Industries had ever faced. There's one condition, Chen Wei said quietly. Maya continues her therapy throughout this process. She's my proof of concept, but more than that, she's become... He paused, looking at Victoria. She's family. I won't abandon her progress for corporate timelines. Of course, Victoria said immediately. Maya's well-being comes first, always. Marcus looked around the table, reading the faces of his fellow board members. The calculus had changed completely. All in favor of postponing the Henderson merger discussions pending Dr. Chen's business proposal? 8 hands went up. Only Marcus hesitated, then slowly raised his own hand. Motion carried, Victoria said, barely containing her relief. Dr. Chen, welcome to Blackstone Industries, officially. But corporate victories, Victoria learned over the following weeks, came with their own complications. The announcement of Chen Wei's appointment as Director of Therapeutic Services created a media frenzy that neither of them had anticipated. Businessweek ran a feature titled From Janitor to Executive, the Cinderella story that's disrupting corporate America. Forbes called it the most unlikely career pivot in Fortune 500 history. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from inspirational to skeptical to openly hostile. The criticism was brutal and often personal. Online comments questioned Chen Wei's credentials, Victoria's judgment, and Maya's diagnosis. Some accused Victoria of staging the entire story for publicity. Others suggested she was having a mental breakdown and using her daughter as a prop. The worst came from a competitor's blog that published a piece titled Billionaire CEO Replaces Medical Experts with Custodial Staff. What could go wrong? The article dissected every aspect of Maya's treatment, questioning whether her progress was real or manufactured for corporate gain. Maya, sheltered as she was, still felt the impact. Children at her new school, a progressive private academy that supported her bilingual needs, began asking pointed questions about her fake daddy and whether she was really sick or just pretending. One afternoon, Maya came home in tears, her careful emotional equilibrium shattered by a classmate who'd announced that her mother was crazy for letting the janitor man play doctor. Victoria found Maya in her room, curled up on her bed, speaking rapid, distressed Mandarin to her stuffed animals. It was the first regression they'd seen in months, and it terrified Victoria. Chen Wei arrived within 20 minutes of Victoria's panicked phone call. He sat on the edge of Maya's bed and listened to her pour out her fears and confusion in both languages. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Little star," he said in Mandarin, "do you remember what Mrs. Liu used to tell you about storms?" Maya nodded, wiping her eyes. She said storms make the strongest trees grow deeper roots. The wind pushes against them, but instead of falling down, they grow stronger underground where nobody can see. He switched to English, including Victoria in the conversation. People are saying mean things because they're scared. When someone does something new, something that changes how things work, it frightens people who like things the old way. "But what if they're right?" Maya asked in a small voice. "What if I'm not really better? What if I'm still broken and we're all pretending?" Victoria's heart clenched, but Chen Wei's response was immediate and firm. "Maya, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued in perfectly serious tones. "You speak 2 languages beautifully. You understand emotions and express them clearly. You make friends easily when people give you a chance. You remember stories and create art and solve problems. Which part of that sounds broken to you?" Maya considered this carefully. the part where I can't ignore loud noises. That's not broken, that's sensitive hearing. The part where I need extra time to answer questions? That's not broken, that's careful thinking. The part where I get scared when people change plans suddenly? That's not broken, that's needing predictability, which lots of people need. Maya's face brightened with understanding. So the broken part was just the machine in my ear that made everything hurt? Exactly, and that machine is gone forever. Victoria watched this interaction with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. Chen Wei wasn't just helping Maya process criticism, he was teaching her to define herself on her own terms, rather than accepting other people's definitions of her worth. That evening, after Maya had fallen asleep between them during a movie, Victoria and Chen Wei talked quietly in her living room. The penthouse apartment felt warmer now, less like a showplace and more like a home, with Maya's artwork on the refrigerator and Chen Wei's books scattered on side tables. "Are you having second thoughts?" Victoria asked. "About the company, the publicity, all of this?" Chen Wei was quiet for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Every day, but not because of the criticism." "Then why?" "Because I'm terrified of failing again. In Beijing, I was so confident I could help any child. I believed my methods were foolproof. Then Li died, and I realized that all my expertise meant nothing if I couldn't protect the people I loved most." He turned to look at Victoria. "What if I can't help the other children the way I helped Maya? What if her progress was just luck, and I lead your company into a disaster that destroys everything you've built?" Victoria reached for his hand. "What if you help hundreds of children find their voices? What if you create something that changes how society understands neurodivergence and bilingual development? What if you honor Li's memory by becoming the father figure to children who need what you have to give? And if I fail? Then we fail together. But Maya won't fail. She's already found her voice, and that can never be taken away from her." Chen Wei squeezed her hand gently. "When did you become so wise about taking risks?" Victoria smiled. "When I met a janitor who taught me that the most important conversations happen in languages we have to learn, not languages we already speak." 6 weeks later, Chen Wei presented his business proposal to the board. The conference room was packed, not just with board members but with pediatric specialists, linguistics experts, and families who'd volunteered for the pilot program. Maya sat in the front row with 5 other children who'd been identified as potential candidates for Chen Wei's bilingual therapy approach. Each child had been misdiagnosed or inadequately treated using traditional methods. Each family had exhausted their options with conventional specialists. Chen Wei's presentation was flawless. Comprehensive research, detailed methodology, projected outcomes, financial projections that made even Marcus nod approvingly. But the real proof came when he invited the pilot program families to share their experiences. An 8-year-old boy named David, previously diagnosed with severe ADHD, demonstrated how he could focus intently when instructions were given in Spanish, his grandmother's language, rather than English. A 6-year-old girl named Priya, labeled as having oppositional defiant disorder, became cooperative and engaged when her therapist learned to incorporate Hindi phrases that her deceased mother had used during bedtime stories. Maya herself stood before the board and spoke clearly in both Mandarin and English. "Before Dr. Chen helped me, I had words inside but no way to let them out. Now I have 2 languages to share my feelings. Other children need this help too." The vote was unanimous. Blackstone Industries would launch its therapeutic services division with Chen Wei as director and full funding for expansion. But the real transformation happened that evening. at a quiet celebration in Victoria's apartment. Maya had fallen asleep, curled against Chen Wei on the couch, her head on his shoulder, her breathing peaceful and even. "She calls you Baba now," Victoria said quietly, using the Mandarin word for father that Maya had started using naturally. "Is that okay with you?" Victoria thought about Maya's biological father, who had abandoned them when autism became too complicated for his comfort. She thought about the years of trying to be both mother and father to a child she couldn't reach. She thought about how Chen Wei's presence had made their small family complete in ways she'd never expected. "It's more than okay. It's right." Chen Wei shifted slightly to better support Maya's sleeping weight. "I never thought I'd be a father again after Li died. I thought that part of my heart was closed forever." "Hearts don't close," Victoria said, echoing words Maya had spoken weeks earlier. "They just wait for the right people to remind them how to open." As 2024 drew to a close, the Blackstone Therapeutic Services Division had helped 43 children find their voices across 6 languages. Chen Wei had been invited to speak at international conferences. Victoria's company had tripled in value, and Maya had started 3rd grade in a mainstream classroom with bilingual support. But the most important transformation was invisible to the outside world. It happened in quiet moments. When Maya woke up from nightmares and found Chen Wei reading in the chair beside her bed. When Victoria came home early from work to find father and daughter building elaborate block cities while talking in rapid-fire Mandarin. When the 3 of them cooked dinner together, switching between languages as naturally as breathing. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks exploded over Manhattan, Maya made an announcement that surprised them both. Standing on the balcony between Victoria and Chen Wei, she pointed at the sparkling lights and said, "Next year I want to help Dr. Chen teach other kids. I want to show them it's okay to speak different languages." Victoria and Chen Wei exchanged glances over her head. Their 8-year-old daughter was already planning to become a bridge for other children caught between worlds. "You think you're ready for that responsibility?" Chen Wei asked in Mandarin. Maya answered in English. "I think other kids need to know that being different isn't being broken. And I think they need to see someone like them who learned to be happy." As the clock struck midnight and the new year began, Victoria realized that this was what healing actually looked like. Not a return to some imagined perfect state, but the building of something entirely new from the pieces of what remained. They were a family now, assembled from loss and hope and the patient work of learning to communicate across every barrier that had once seemed insurmountable. Maya's voice had been saved, but more than that, she had learned to save others. Chen Wei had found his way back to helping children, but now he did it with the wisdom that comes from surviving devastating loss. Victoria had discovered that the most important mergers weren't corporate. They were the joining of hearts that chose to become family despite every reason to remain strangers. And in the quiet apartment high above a city that never slept, 3 people who had been lost in different languages finally understood each other perfectly. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.